You've always been a fan of nature and adventure. So, I decided, along with a group of friends, to go on a camping trip in a deep forest located on a remote mountain far from the cities. It was our first time visiting this secluded place. I had heard some scary stories about the forest before, but I always thought they were just myths. On the first day of the trip, we arrived at the designated camping spot. The sun was still setting, bathing the sky in warm colors that brought a sense of comfort and tranquility. We pitched our tents beside a small lake surrounded by dense trees. The weather was fantastic, and the sound of flowing water, combined with the gentle breeze, added a magical serenity to the place. However, as soon as the sun disappeared, things began to change. At night, while we were sitting around the fire, sharing stories and laughter, I started feeling something strange. There were unnatural sounds in the forest, like heavy footsteps moving the ground in the distance. I tried to reassure myself, thinking these sounds were just animals wandering at night. But suddenly, all conversation stopped, and we all felt it. A strange sensation. One of my friends asked, "Did you hear that?" I looked into everyone's eyes and saw the same worry reflected. We decided to investigate the source of the sound, climbing the hills surrounding the campsite. Indeed, we began to hear a noise coming from within the dark forest. The sound grew closer and closer until it felt unnervingly near. The trees swayed unnaturally, as if blown by an unusual wind, yet we saw nothing. Then, in the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving among the trees. It was a vague, white shape, tall and shadow-like, appearing and disappearing quickly between the trees. My heart raced wildly, gripped by complete panic, but I tried to compose myself and understand what was happening. We decided to head back to the campsite, but the path became foggier and the forest seemed denser. We took a wrong turn and after a while realized we were lost. Fear and anxiety crept in, and when we tried to use our phones, we discovered there was no signal at all. The atmosphere grew eerie, and I felt an invisible presence watching us. The sound we'd heard earlier had morphed into incomprehensible whispers, as though someone was speaking an ancient language from afar. As we walked through the darkness, one of my friends suddenly let out a piercing scream. We rushed to him, only to find that he had vanished. The ground before us was covered in a thin layer of mist, and when we looked around, there was no trace of him, only strange footprints on the ground. We were completely disoriented. Everything felt bizarre and confusing. The sounds grew louder, and suddenly, shadowy figures emerged before us, moving swiftly between the trees. We were terrified, running with all our strength. We could still hear their footsteps mingling with our own frantic breathing. Eventually, we reached the campsite, but there was no sign of the other friends. The candles had burned out, the tents were torn, and chaos seemed to permeate the place. No one was there except for the shadows that filled the area. In that moment, I realized we weren't in an ordinary place. The area was filled with spirits or entities not of this world. I heard strange whispers closing in on us, and suddenly, a tall figure appeared. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes and stood several meters away, watching us with glowing eyes. His body was dark and his features indistinguishable. As he approached, time seemed to freeze, as if we were trapped in another dimension. Fortunately, at the last moment, we heard voices approaching from afar. It was other friends who had come looking for us. We ran toward them without hesitation, jumped into the cars, and left the place as fast as we could, never to return. I can't explain exactly what happened there, but I know that forest was filled with something else. Something dark, something ancient beyond understanding. From that trip onward, I've avoided going to any dark or remote places. And every time I recall those whispers, I feel a strange certainty that the shadows I saw that night weren't just figments of my imagination. They were real. Years ago, a group of friends and I decided to go on a trip to the sea. The idea was a mix of excitement and relaxation, especially since it had been a long time since we last went on a beach getaway. The sea was close to the city, and the serene atmosphere nature provided was priceless. We decided to spend the night there in tents on the shore, away from the noise of daily life. We arrived in the afternoon, where the sea reflected the calm blue sky, and the golden sands stretched before us like an invitation to relax. We set up our tents near the water, where gentle waves lapped against the shore, and the air was filled with the refreshing scent of the sea. In the evening, after dinner, we decided to take a walk along the beach. The sky had begun to darken, but the lights from our tents and the campfire we had lit added a warm touch to the place. Everything was calm, but I started to feel something strange. The sea that day, despite its beauty, seemed unusual. Its waves weren't as calm as usual. They crashed against each other unnaturally, almost as if they were challenging each other in silence. There was also a faint smell of sea mold in the air, even though the beach was clean. As we walked along the shore, we noticed a light far out at sea. It looked like the light of a distant boat or perhaps floating lanterns. But it was stationary, unmoving. We tried to take pictures of it, but every time we got closer, it seemed to drift further away. After a few minutes, it vanished entirely. We decided to head back to the campsite as darkness was falling quickly, and the weather was changing fast. The wind began to pick up, causing the waves to grow larger and louder. Little did we know that the wind was only the beginning of something strange. Around midnight, one of our friends suddenly woke up screaming, startling everyone. She looked as though she had seen something but was too confused and scared to explain what it was. She said, "There was someone on the water, standing there in the middle of the darkness, and then they just disappeared." Her words sent chills down our spines, but we tried to calm her, telling her it was probably just her imagination or maybe someone swimming in the sea. However, when we decided to go out and check, we felt something eerie. The sea was pitch black, and the waves were growing fiercer. The wind's sound was deafening, and it seemed to whisper warnings in our ears. As we approached the water's edge, we noticed something unusual: footprints in the sand. But these weren't the footprints of any ordinary person. They were deep and heavy, as if something enormous had walked across the shore. At that moment, we all felt a strange presence in the air, as if the sea itself was alive and restless. The wind carried faint, haunting whispers, as though someone or something was watching us from the depths. Suddenly, in the distance, we saw a dark shape in the water. It looked like a person floating, but unnaturally so, moving swiftly and erratically as if defying the current. When we tried to focus on it, it vanished into the dark waves. Terrified, we ran back to the campsite, our hearts racing with fear. Everyone was tense and uneasy. Despite our attempts to calm ourselves, the sea seemed to boil with unrest. The waves rose higher and higher, and the atmosphere felt charged, as though nature itself was warning us. By dawn, the wind had calmed, and the sea returned to its usual peaceful state, as if nothing had happened. But we all knew that what we had witnessed was no mere dream. There was something strange about that sea, something unexplainable. The following day, we decided to leave the beach, but we carried a deep feeling of unease with us. There was something in the sea that we couldn't understand, and that feeling stayed with us long after we had left. Since that trip, the sea has felt different to me. I can't describe it in words, but I've learned that not everything we see is what it seems. Sometimes the depths the oceans hold are more than we can imagine. This story happened to me on an ordinary day, yet it remains etched in my memory, even after years have passed. It was a strange experience that made me rethink many aspects of my life. On one hot summer day, I decided to take a short trip to one of the remote villages known for its serene atmosphere and beautiful natural scenery. I was searching for a place to escape the pressures of daily life and find some mental peace. I chose to travel alone, seeking time to myself away from the city's noise. I arrived at the small village in the afternoon. The place was incredibly quiet, with narrow streets and trees surrounding everything. The weather was warm and sunny, yet there was a fresh scent of grass in the air. I decided to take a walk and explore the area before settling in one of the small hotels there. While strolling through one of the narrow paths, I noticed someone standing near an old house. He was dressed very simply, and his eyes were peculiar, as if they held a deep secret. His features were somewhat mysterious, yet he had a calm dignity about him. It felt as if he was looking at me from afar, as though we knew each other, even though I had never seen him before in my life. I unintentionally approached him and greeted him casually. He responded with a slight smile, then unexpectedly began to speak to me. "You're here looking for something, aren't you?" he said. I was stunned by his words, as I hadn't mentioned anything about my intentions or what I was searching for. Smiling faintly, trying to mask my confusion, I replied, "No, I'm just looking for a quiet place to enjoy my time," but somehow, there was something in his eyes that told me he knew what I was thinking. His words were strange, as if he had known me for a long time or could read my thoughts in that moment. I couldn't pinpoint why, but I felt an unsettling sensation stirring within me. Then he said, "You'll find what you're looking for at the right time and place, but you must be cautious about what you choose." His words were cryptic, carrying an almost ominous undertone. Yet, I ignored my growing unease and responded with a sarcastic smile, trying to shake off the discomfort creeping over me. Finally, the man said, "If you want to stay on the right path, just remember that life is not always what it seems." Before I could respond or even process what he said, he disappeared suddenly. I didn't see him walk away, nor did I hear any sound. He vanished as if fading into thin air, like the earth had swallowed him up. I stood frozen for a moment, feeling an extraordinary presence in the atmosphere, questioning what had just happened. I was in a remote area, far from any technology or indications of other people. I was sure no one else was around at that moment. I wandered around the village a little more, but I couldn't stop thinking about that strange man. There was no sign of him anywhere. I searched near the surrounding houses and even asked some locals about him, but they seemed unaware of his existence or identity. I returned to the hotel after that encounter, with his words echoing in my mind. Life is not always what it seems. I couldn't ignore them, and I began to feel as though I had learned some mysterious lesson in that moment. His words carried a warning, but I couldn't determine exactly what he was warning me about. Days passed, and I returned to my daily life in the city. Yet, something inside me had changed. I began to view things differently. Life wasn't always as it appeared, and I started observing the world around me more cautiously, wondering if there were indeed greater truths beyond what we can see. I knew the story wasn't just a coincidence. There was something strange behind those fleeting moments I shared with that man in the village. But even after all these years, I've never been able to uncover what lay behind his cryptic words, or what he truly meant by that warning.